I just finished watching Delicious in Dungeon today, so we're gonna talk about it. This will be a spoiler-free review, and the reason for that is because there's only one season out currently, and it just finished releasing, I think, last month, so it's really fresh. So I'm gonna keep it, I'm gonna keep it spoiler light. I will not talk about anything that happens past episode 10, and even those first 10 episodes, I will be mindful of what would be appropriate to talk about if you haven't watched or read it yet. So the story starts off when a guild of adventurers is too tired, too hungry, and does not have enough energy to continue on in the dungeon that they're currently exploring. And because of that, they lose one of their members, one of their family. Laios, the main character, well, the main adventurer, he's the one that we primarily follow. They all get a spotlight, but I'll call Laios the main character for convenience sake. Laios' sister gets eaten by a dragon, but before she's eaten, she magics them out of the dungeon to save their lives. Now, she would want them to just save themselves, but Laios would never abandon his sister. He would never leave her alone, and because of that, he's going back in the dungeon, accompanied by two more of the crew members, Marcil and Chilchuck. Two of the crew members did end up going their own way, one because he felt that he had better chances of getting Fallon, the crew member that they lost, getting her back by his own means, and then another that left to pursue her own ambitions, to take care of herself. So these three go back into the dungeon to try to rescue Fallon. And because death works differently here, and because a dragon's digestive system also works very slowly, they believe that they have a true chance at being able to find the dragon again and be able to release her from its belly and return her to their group. But they're going about it a different way this time. This time, they're taking their time, they're nourishing their bodies, they're making sure that they are able to fight and that they won't make the same mistake they made last time, which is to fight when they don't have the energy, when they don't have the nourishment, when they're not at the strength that they need to be able to face something much, much stronger than them. Which is one of the main reasons why this show is so focused around food and cooking. And another reason is because of a new crew member that they take on named Senshi. Senshi is a dwarf that has lived in this dungeon for a very, very long time, and because of that, he knows the monsters that live here, he knows a lot about the dungeon itself, and he knows how to survive off of the dungeon. Namely, how to eat the monsters you kill while you're there. Which is generally kind of a cultural faux pas, but they decide to roll with it, and they explore a lot of unique cuisines because of it. I will return back to talking about the dungeon itself more in a minute, but first I want to start by honing in on the characters a little bit tighter. Laios, the one that I called the main character earlier, is the monster-obsessed, overexcited, but not always observant adventurer. What he lacks in wisdom, he more than makes up for in loyalty and determination. He trusts with his whole heart, and he is a certified good boy. Marcil is a book-smart elf that isn't as good as Fallon at magic, but is trying her absolute best, and really doesn't want to eat that monster. She's used for comedic effect a lot with her reactions, and her nervousness can make her seem incompetent at times. But despite how she appears at first, she's incredibly intelligent and willing to reach far outside of the box in order to understand magic and be able to help those she loves. But you'll have to watch the story yourself to understand in what ways she's willing to go outside of the box. Chilchuck is not a kid. He is not a kid, okay? He's a half-foot that is incredibly perceptive and a lifesaver in tricky situations. He's not a fighter, but he is incredibly brave despite his fear. And his perceptiveness extends to the members of the crew when he sees they've been hiding something or they need to talk something out. And Senshi. Oh, sweet Senshi. Our seasoned cook who has been surviving in this dungeon for a long time and is more than willing to help our crew survive off of it. He's calm and level-headed while the rest tend to react to what's around them. But despite keeping it together even in the most terrifying situations, he has a great depth of emotions that he's carrying, and we get the pleasure of discovering those as we go deeper into the show. Those are the four main characters here at the beginning of the story. We do continue to explore more characters as we go on, or characters that are introduced early on. Later, we get to actually spend time with them and get to know them. And there are so many side characters that I feel are well fleshed out, even within just a couple of episodes, to the point that I would love to discuss them more in depth, but I feel since they're explored later on that I shouldn't here and now. But even the characters that I did talk about, the main crew that we start with, what I've given you is very base level of who they are on introduction. Each of them comes with their own set of flaws, of hang-ups, and of secrets that they're keeping that we won't fully understand their character until we start diving into those things once they've been with the crew long enough that they start to share. It's easy to make characters, especially lead characters, that are incredibly strong, incredibly capable, that don't come with a huge number of flaws. These characters are quite flawed. None of them really have that main character archetype. None of them are strong enough that they can just carry the rest of the crew, brave enough that they can handle any situation, or noble enough that they are clearly the hero. They all come with their own baggage, be it in their cultural history or in their own individual experiences that they have to confront and shed off around the dinner table. And it's not just these main characters, it's side characters that come up, as well as characters like an entire group of people where there's a lot of baggage there that they have to confront, argue, insult, and sit down and talk. Not to say that every conflict gets resolved in the entire series, but it just shows a world where there's a lot of friction because, you know, worlds tend to have friction. And it shows characters that have a lot of baggage because people tend to have baggage. And it shows misunderstandings, miscommunications, ways that people communicate differently, and that causes pain and friction and tension. But it also shows trust and effort to work through those differences. My favorite thing in this show is how caring these characters are to each other. In nearly every episode, there's something to note that one person does for the other. Oftentimes, they have to put themselves aside to care for one another. The things that they're holding on to, the things that they don't like, the things that they don't want to surrender. Be it two characters that have issues with each other because one doesn't like magic and the other doesn't like cooking up and eating monsters, but they both set that aside and work together and put themselves out there in order to meet each other halfway. These characters can be impulsive, they can be rude, they can be insulting, and they can have plans that fail and cause each other harm. They can keep secrets that cause divides in the group. They have distinct flaws as well as distinct strengths, and that makes the character work in the story so much stronger as we watch them learn and grow. But also the fact that none of them are the hero of the story, you know, the main character in the sense that, you know, they're just going to be the one to always defeat the baddies. Instead, they are forced to rely on one another, even in very uncomfortable ways. They have to think strategically, they have to be really clever and work around issues and rely on the other person's instincts or strengths in order to make it through situations where other groups would be more capable. The first half of the season is a slow and wholesome episodic plod that gets you close to the characters, their relationships, and growth, so that when it really takes off, we're totally invested in the moments of peril, both physical and emotional. But don't worry, the first half of the story still has plenty of adventure, discovery, action, and humor tucked into every corner as well. Okay, let's talk about the world building. So in this world, every now and then a dungeon will appear. It'll sprout up. And the thing about these dungeons is that everything is different here. Basic survival and world elements might change. In very early on, if not the first episode, I think the very first episode, Laios just very offhandedly mentions the first time he died. And the crew members are fine with that, and everybody just casually, every now and then will bring up, oh yeah, you know, when I died. And we understand that there is some form of regeneration, resurrection that can happen in the dungeon. But that's not the only thing. The dungeon changes and expands, it self-heals, and it contains a plethora of different monsters on different floors, and these monsters themselves have their own ecosystem, and that's a big place where Senshi and his knowledge comes in handy, because he has such a respect for the ecosystem. He knows we don't want to kill too many of these because that'll then affect the entire chain. It'll affect the food for these ones, which means that they'll die, which means that the larger creatures can't hunt, etc., etc. Or we have ghosts that seem impossible to handle, but because Marcille has so much book knowledge and experience in magic, she knows exactly what you're supposed to do to handle them, and because Fallon was a great example as well. Or Chilchuck's experience with mimics, because he's the sneak, the sleuth, the one that can pick locks and can get them into impossible situations, or out of impossible situations. He understands certain magical things that come cloaked and that seem inconspicuous, but he can sort of see through the guise because of his experience. Or Laios, who simply has a monster obsession and can categorize and nerd out anytime a monster comes into a scene. But these monsters themselves too aren't just these mindless drones. They too have their own reasons for why they would attack or wouldn't attack, or how they would attack, what provokes them, and what their whole system is too. It really does feel like a well fleshed out, well thought out world, and with each level of the dungeon we're exploring whole new threats and dangers. So even though I called the first half of the story a slow plod because we're focused on the characters and we're focused on the food, we also get plenty of action and plenty of new adventure and world building that all seems to kind of fit together and work off of each other. Something that happened, 10 episodes ago, suddenly we'll understand how it fits into that ecosystem and why it was that way, and we'll just keep building and expanding on these things. Speaking of which, the details that are planted early on in the story, not just in the world building, but in the characters and in the culture and in the world at large, the details that are just dropped casually early on build on each other and build on each other, to the point that there are certain things that seem like a simple mention, and then way later, as we learn more, it recontextualizes really big things. It adds more impact, it adds more depth, and it really is a story that was very, very mindful of details, and that it just seems to fit together really nicely. Now, again, I didn't talk about the second half, or a little bit more than half, of season 1, and I'm just gonna go ahead and say it's the better part. I'm telling you all of the setup stuff that's really good stuff, but episode 10 and forward, oh my goodness. It was so fun. It went in directions I did not expect to happen. There was so much more action, adventure, twist, and unknown. Like, from episode to episode, I had no idea what we were going to do next, or how we were going to handle the next situation. But suffice it to say, it did get deeper, darker, and more surprising. The action picks up, the number of twists pick up. I sincerely didn't know what would happen next from episode to episode. I was constantly surprised and constantly just saying, like, where will we go from here? I called the first 10 episodes, or rather 9 episodes, a slow plot. And that does not mean boring, I'll be very clear. But, the pacing is a lot slower, and then it sort of takes off. That slow plot, where we're getting to know these characters, where we're watching their relationships form and build and start to mold and grow, and where we're starting to understand the baseline mechanics of this dungeon and of the world and of the wider world politics, which also get touched on early on. That all sinks us into this comfortable attachment so that when it does take off and start running, we too are invested in both the physical peril that they get involved in as well as in the emotional steps, pains that we see that they're carrying or that's going on currently in this moment in what they're going through. And it makes everything hit so much harder. There were episodes where I thought, I really like these characters, and then I would just be crying through an episode because I'm like, I love them so much and I didn't notice. Delicious in Dungeon is a story that really hooked me initially with its humor and its unique and interesting presentation of food and its mechanics in the world. It got me excited because of the world building and the action, but it was the characters that really made it a special story for me. Even though there's so much about the mechanics of the story that's really special and fun, it's the characters and my investment in them that made it for me. Delicious in Dungeon is not a new favorite for me. I know this is a really highly praised story because I really enjoyed it, but it's not like, it doesn't beat out series like One Piece, JoJo's Bizarre Adventures, Frieren, Dragon Ball, and others that I praise crazy high, but it's one that I have sunk into a really comfortable love with, and one that I'm very excited for season 2 of the anime. And it's definitely one that I recommend if it sounds like something that you would enjoy. I would love to chat with you more about it in the comments. If you are going to talk spoilers, please write spoilers and then space so that people have to click to read more in order to get to the spoilers, so we can try to keep people from spoilers. And please specify manga spoilers if you're going outside of season 1 of anime, because I have only watched season 1 of the anime. I haven't read any of the manga. That way I know which comments not to click on. But please do chat with me more about it in the comments. I would love to hear what you think about the show. What do you like? What do you not like? Or the manga. I'll see you again soon. Bye.